Marcus had always imagined life beyond the dusty fields of his village as something grand. The songs of traveling bards and the tales of veterans who had marched under Rome's banners painted a life of honor, glory, and wealth. When the conscription notice arrived, he did not hesitate. To serve in the Roman legion was more than duty. It was a chance to carve his name into the annals of history. His first day at the legion's training camp was nothing like the stories he had heard. Rows of young recruits, eyes wide with fear and excitement, stood under the watchful gaze of veteran centurions. The air was thick with discipline. Sharp commands barked, armor clanking, and soldiers running in formation. Marcus felt the weight of his own equipment. The sarcina strapped across his back pressed heavily on his shoulders, though it seemed laughably light compared to what the veterans carried. Every day would bring drills to exhaustion, weapon practice, until his arms ached, and lessons in the rigid structure that defined a legionary's life. Even the simplest tasks demanded perfection. Marcus stumbled during the first march around the camp, his legs trembling, sandals rubbing raw against his skin. A sharp whistle cut through the air, and a centurion's shadow loomed over him. Marcus barely had time to bow his head before he was ordered to repeat the march, faster, heavier, and in perfect step with the others. Humiliation burned, but alongside it, an unexpected determination took root. At night, Marcus lay on the hard ground with hundreds of others, listening to the rhythmic sounds of snoring and the occasional cough or groan from those struggling to adapt. He had imagined camaraderie and brotherhood, but first, there was suffering to endure. His mind oscillated between the excitement of what was to come and the harsh reality of life in the legion. Discipline was unforgiving, and weakness was punished. By the end of the week, Marcus began to understand that enlistment was not just a ticket to glory, it was a trial by fire. The true test was not in facing enemies on distant battlefields, but in learning to endure the relentless physical and mental demands imposed by the legion. Every march, every command, every ache in his muscles was preparing him for the ultimate. Truth, a Roman legionary survived not by courage alone, but through resilience, obedience, and an unyielding will to endure. Marcus had taken the first step, and already he felt himself transforming. The journey had begun. The sun had barely risen when Marcus and his cohort were roused from their meager sleep. The centurions' voices cut through the dawn like whips, and the soldiers scrambled to shoulder their packs, already heavy with weapons, armor, rations, and tools. Marcus felt the weight pressing down on him, but there was no time to complain. Today marked the beginning of the first long march, and the ground would test every ounce of his strength. The march began in silence, broken only by the crunch of sandals against gravel and the occasional barked command. The path stretched endlessly before them, jagged hills, rocky plains, and dusty trails that shimmered under the heat. Blisters formed quickly on Marcus's feet, his shoulders burned, and every muscle in his body screamed for relief. Yet even as he faltered, the rhythm of the legion carried him forward. The veterans moved beside him, faces etched with years of suffering, their endurance both intimidating and inspiring. Food was scarce. A small portion of dry bread and water became the only sustenance, and the sun offered no mercy. Dust coated, their faces and sweat soaked through tunics and armor. The march was relentless, unyielding. Each mile seemed longer than the last, testing not just the body but the mind. Marcus began to understand why the old tales emphasized discipline above all. Those who slowed, those who faltered, risked being left behind, or worse. Yet amidst the agony, something extraordinary emerged. Marcus found himself forming bonds with the men around him. Titus, an older soldier whose back bore scars from countless campaigns, offered tips for pacing and managing the pack. Lucius, a fellow recruit who often stumbled beside him, became a companion in suffering. Shared hardship created trust deeper than any friendship Marcus had known. When Marcus's legs threatened to collapse beneath him, the simple grip of a comrade's hand or a whispered word of encouragement pushed him onward. As the sun began to sink and the day's march finally ended, the Legion built its temporary camp. Marcus collapsed onto the hard ground, exhausted but alive, and reflected on the day. He realized the march itself was not just preparation. It was the trial of becoming a Roman soldier. Endurance, discipline, and camaraderie were forged not in the battles to come, but in the punishing miles that tested every soldier to his limits. Marcus's journey had only begun, but he now understood that the true measure of a legionary was not in courage alone, but in the strength to endure day after day, march after march. Weeks into the march, Marcus began to feel the true weight of life as a Roman legionary. The roads had grown harsher, the terrain rougher, and the sun more unforgiving. Food had become a rare luxury, often reduced to thin, tasteless porridge, or hard, dry bread that scraped his throat with every bite. Water, when available, was muddy and tepid, barely quenching thirst. Every day tested the limits of his body, yet it was the mind that strained the most, fighting despair and the desire to give up. The marches became grueling rituals of suffering. Muscles screamed with every step, and blisters on his feet turned into open sores. Some soldiers collapsed, unable to continue, only to be dragged along by comrades or left behind as the Legion pressed onward. Marcus learned quickly that survival depended not on courage alone, but on endurance, strategy, and sheer willpower. Small victories, keeping pace for a mile longer, finishing the ration before it ran out, setting up the camp efficiently, became monumental achievements in themselves. Amid the struggle, Marcus found unexpected solace in companionship. Titus, the scarred veteran, shared stories of his campaigns, each tale offering lessons in patience, strategy, and resilience. Lucius, always cheerful despite the hardships, became his shadow in the march, motivating him when the pain threatened to overwhelm. Together, they shared whispers of hope and encouragement during the silent hours of the march, carrying each other through the darkness of exhaustion and hunger. The hardship forged a bond stronger than any Marcus had known in the peaceful fields of his home. The Legion was no longer just a group of soldiers marching together. It was a living organism, each member vital to the survival of the whole. When Marcus stumbled or faltered, hands gripped his arms. When Lucius collapsed, Marcus pushed him forward. Brotherhood became a lifeline, a force stronger than hunger or fatigue, and the loyalty to the men beside him began to outweigh all fear of punishment or death. By the end of this arduous period, Marcus realized that the march itself had transformed him. The boy who had dreamt of glory was gone, replaced by a soldier who understood that discipline, resilience, and the bonds of comradeship were the true tools of survival. The hardships were cruel, but they had tempered him, preparing him not just to face battle, but to endure the relentless trials that defined life in the Roman legion. After countless weeks of relentless marching, Marcus and his cohort finally approached the edge of enemy territory. But the anticipation of combat did not ease the burden of the journey. In many ways, the trials of the march had been far harsher than any battle he could imagine. The sun beat down mercilessly, the dust clung to every inch of their skin, and the weight of their packs felt heavier than ever. Yet Marcus noticed something new in himself, a steady rhythm in his steps, a hardened determination in his eyes. The real battle, he realized, had not been against an enemy with swords and shields, but against himself. Each day of marching, each blister, each sleepless night had been a test of endurance, courage, and mental strength. Soldiers who had joined alongside him had fallen away, unable to endure the grueling pace, leaving only those who had mastered the art of perseverance. Marcus now understood that the legion did not reward mere bravery. It demanded resilience, obedience, and unwavering commitment. As the cohort set up camp for the final night before entering enemy territory, Marcus observed his comrades. Titus moved with practiced ease, still carrying his pack with a stoic calm that belied his years of service. Lucius, once easily discouraged, now laughed lightly at a shared joke, his spirit tempered by suffering. Marcus felt an overwhelming sense of pride, not in glory or conquest, but in the brotherhood forged through shared hardship. The men who had endured alongside him were no longer strangers. They were brothers in arms, bonded through pain and endurance. That night, lying under the stars on the hard, cold ground, Marcus reflected on the journey. The endless miles, the punishing drills, the hunger, and the exhaustion had all prepared him for the reality ahead. He felt the transformation within. The naive boy who had dreamt of heroism was gone, replaced by a legionary shaped by discipline and hardship. Every step of the march had been a crucible, refining him into a soldier capable of facing whatever lay beyond the horizon. When dawn arrived, the cohort stood ready. Marcus tightened the straps of his pack, adjusted his armor, and gripped his gladius with steady hands. The battlefield awaited, but he knew that the march itself had been the true battle. Survival, endurance, and the unbreakable bonds of brotherhood had already won the first victory. Marcus was no longer just a soldier. He was a Roman legionary, tempered by suffering and ready to face whatever trials lay ahead.